She had spent years being treated like the empty chair no one wanted. With the invitation trembling in her hand, she whispered, "I wish someone would choose me." She never knew the millionaire had stopped behind the door and heard every word. Before we begin, we'd enjoy knowing where you're watching from today. While you're here, tell us how your day's going. We'd genuinely love to hear from you. From everyone on our team, thank you for being part of this community. Now, let's settle in for today's story. The dryer on the end had a limp. Willa Sawyer could hear it from the folding table, a lopsided thumping sound, like something with one bad leg trying to keep up with the others. She didn't bother checking it anymore. Sheets from the Ellery Inn, 6 loads of them, needed folding before the 7 in the morning pickup, and the machine would either finish or it wouldn't. Outside, the mist off the water had turned to a fine, cold rain, tapping the front windows in no particular rhythm. Harbor lights stayed open all night for exactly this kind of weather. Fishermen who needed their gear dry before the next tide, a bartender 2 doors down who washed his uniform shirts on his lunch break, whoever wandered in with nowhere else to be. Tonight it was just Willa and the machines. She knew this room the way some people knew a kitchen. Dryer 4 ran hot enough to shrink cotton if you weren't paying attention. The Anchor Inn's owner always sent 9 bags and wrote 10 on the ticket. Old Mr. Pelletier, who came in around midnight most Thursdays, needed his quarters given to him already counted into stacks of 4 because his hands shook too much to count them himself, and he'd rather not have anyone watch him try. The folding table had a short leg, and a wedge of cardboard under it kept the whole thing from rocking. She was checking a delivery slip for the Harborview Hotel, 6 dozen towels, short 2 according to her count, when her purse slid an inch on the counter and the envelope inside shifted into view. Cream-colored. Melissa's handwriting on the front, careful and round the way it had been since 3rd grade. Willa didn't need to open it. She'd read it enough times to know the reply card by heart. Willa Sawyer and guest. The line after the plus sign had gone soft and gray from her thumb running over it, like she could rub an answer into existence if she tried hard enough. She tucked it back down and reached into her apron pocket instead, where a piece of sea glass sat smooth and cool against her fingers. Green, worn round by 20 years of tide by the time she'd found it on Wilgus Beach. She wasn't sure when touching it had become a habit, somewhere between one bad week and the next probably. The back door opened without a knock, and cold air came in ahead of a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a canvas work jacket dusted pale with what looked like sawdust, not the kind of coat that belonged in a laundromat at midnight. He glanced around like he was double-checking he had the right address. "I'm looking for whoever handles the Harborview account," he said. "That's me." Willa didn't look up from the towels. "You're a little late. Delivery went out 4 hours ago." "I know, that's the problem." He came closer, hands in his pockets. "One of your drivers had a flat. The order showed up short, and somebody at the front desk already complained to my brother. I told him I'd come check it out myself." "Your brother owned the hotel?" "He runs it. I just fix boats." He said it like an apology, or maybe a warning. Willa held up the delivery slip. 68 towels went in the van. I counted them myself before Charlie left, and I counted the flat tire he had to change on the side of Route 1 in the rain. If 2 towels are missing, they're missing somewhere between the hotel's back door and the front desk, not from me. He looked at her for a second too long, like he hadn't expected to be handed a fact instead of an excuse. "Fair enough," he said. "I'll tell him that." She went back to folding. The far dryer thumped uneven and stubborn, and she said, without really meaning to say it to him, "Every laundromat's got one machine that thinks it fought in a war." He almost smiled. Caught himself doing it, like it surprised him. "I'm Owen," he said. "Whitaker." "Willa." She didn't offer her last name back. He didn't ask for it. He lingered near the folding table a moment, watching her check tags against her list, correcting one that had been miscounted, before he said he needed to make a call and stepped into the narrow hallway by the vending machine. Willa heard his voice, low, explaining the tire and the towels to someone on the other end. Then quiet. She dialed her father a few minutes later, the way she did most nights around this time, mostly to hear that he'd taken his evening pills and hadn't tried climbing the porch steps too fast. "You eat something besides crackers?" she asked him. "I had a sandwich. Don't start." "I'm not starting. I'm asking." George laughed, a little breathless the way he got lately, and asked about Melissa's party, whether Willa had figured out what she was wearing. It was an easy question. It shouldn't have undone her. "I don't know if I'm going," she said, and heard her own voice thin out. Dad, I don't want to walk in there alone again, watching everybody's face do that thing where they're sorry for me and relieved it's not them." She pressed her thumb hard against the sea glass in her pocket. The small green piece slipped from her fingers and clicked against the tile beneath the counter. Willa bent quickly, too quickly, and closed her hand around it before it could roll under the folding table. When she straightened, Owen was still in the hallway, but his eyes had moved once to her closed fist and away again, polite enough not to ask. "I wish someone would choose me. Just once. I wish somebody would walk into a room and be proud to stand next to me." She heard herself say it and wished immediately that the laundromat had better walls. In the hallway, Owen had gone still with his phone against his ear, the call already ended, though he hadn't hung up yet. He didn't move. He told himself later it wasn't listening. Exactly. There was nowhere else to stand, and her voice carried the way voices did in empty rooms at midnight. But he didn't leave either. He thought of the invitation sitting folded in his coat pocket, the one from his mother's charity dinner next week, where he was expected to make easy conversation with Caroline as if two people could be seated back into love because the table had an empty chair. When he came back out, Willa was folding again, dry-eyed, composed, like the call had never happened. He didn't say anything about it. He picked up the corrected delivery slip from the counter, thanked her, and told her to have somebody check the dryer on the end before it caught fire. "It's fine," she said. "It just complains a lot." "Yeah, and," he said, glancing back once from the door, "I know the type." Then he was gone, back into the rain, and Willa stood alone again among the folded sheets, not knowing that the piece of her he was carrying out into the dark wasn't the towel count at all. The breakfast counter at Dot's smelled like scorched coffee and bacon grease, and George Sawyer had already claimed his usual stool by the time Willa got there, still in her work apron, her eyes doing the thing where they wouldn't quite focus without another hour of sleep behind them. "You look like you got run over," he said. "Good morning to you, too." She set a paper cup in front of him. "Did you take the 7 o'clock pill, or just the vitamin?" "I took the pill." "George." "I took the pill, Willa." He said her name the way he always did when he wanted her to back off an inch, not a mile. She let it go, mostly because he was already reaching for the sugar, and his hand wasn't shaking any worse than usual. He asked about the party, whether she'd figured out shoes yet, whether Melissa had called about the flowers, ordinary questions. Willa gave him ordinary answers and didn't mention the phone call from the night before, or the fact that a stranger in a sawdust jacket might have heard every word of it. She was still turning that over an hour later, restocking detergent boxes, when the bell over the laundromat door rang, and it was him. Owen. In daylight this time, jeans instead of the work jacket, holding something in both hands like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be carrying it. "You're not delivering towels," she said. "No." He set a small glass jar on the counter between them. Sea glass, maybe 24 pieces, blues and greens, and one amber piece that caught the light. "I saw the piece you dropped last night," he said. "Didn't mean to stare. I collect this off the beach by my shop, and I figured yours might like some company. That sounded normal when I practiced it in the truck." Willa looked at the jar, then at him. "Run low." "On sea glass." He heard himself and winced slightly. It sounded less strange in my head. "Do you make a habit of showing up at people's jobs with presents, or is this a special occasion?" He didn't answer right away, and that pause told her more than anything he could have said. He looked at the folding table, at the dryer that had gone quiet since last night, anywhere but at her. "I heard you on the phone," he said finally. "Last night. I wasn't trying to. I was in the hallway, and I didn't leave when I should have." Willa felt her face go hot. "Which part?" "The part about wishing someone would choose you." He said it plainly, without softening it, and somehow that was worse than if he'd tiptoed around it. "I'm not bringing you a jar of glass to fix that. I don't know how you'd fix something like that. I just didn't want to pretend I hadn't heard it. That felt worse than saying something." She crossed her arms. Behind her, the elderly woman from 2 blocks over was feeding quarters into the change machine, pretending very hard not to listen. "Most people who overhear something private have the decency to keep pretending," Willa said. "I'm bad at pretending, Ask my family. A small, crooked, almost smile. It's caused problems. She didn't smile back, but something in her shoulders loosened half an inch. You always tell people exactly what you overheard? Only when the alternative is worse. Willa looked down at the jar again. The pieces inside were mismatched, some rounder than others, one still sharp-edged along one side like it hadn't finished its work yet. She thought of the single piece already sitting on her windowsill at home, the one from Wilgus Beach she'd carried in her pocket for years without ever explaining to anyone why. I have a family dinner later this month, Owen said before she could ask him to leave. My mother's thing. I'm not looking forward to it. He shrugged like the sentence cost him something to finish. Your sister's party's the same weekend, I'm guessing, since you mentioned it. You guessing? Or you already knew that? Guessing. I'm not that good at eavesdropping. He held up both hands. I'm not asking you to go with me. I'm not asking for anything. If you ever wanted company that didn't want something back, I'd be glad to be that. That's all. No conditions attached to it. No mention of what he'd get out of it. No hint that he expected her to be grateful. Willa had spent enough years around men who called a favor a down payment to recognize when someone wasn't doing that, and it threw her more than if he had. I'll think about it, she said, which was as much as she was willing to give him standing in the middle of her job with a coworker 3 feet away pretending to check the lost and found box. Fair enough. He nodded once, like that answer satisfied him more than it should have, and left the jar on the counter when he went. Willa didn't thank him, not out loud, not with Denise still hovering by the lost and found, arms crossed, eyebrows halfway to her hairline. Who was that? Denise said the second the door shut. Nobody. Nobody left you a jar of beach glass. Willa carried the jar to the back room without answering and set it on the shelf above the time clock, next to her purse, next to the cream-colored envelope she still hadn't opened. That night, after her shift, she brought it home and set it on the windowsill beside the one piece she already had. 2 now, instead of 1. She stood there a moment in the dark kitchen, George's television murmuring from the next room, trying to decide whether she'd just met someone unusually decent or someone whose catch she simply hadn't found yet. She said yes on a Tuesday, in the middle of counting quarters, without any of the ceremony she'd imagined giving it. Owen had come by to drop off a corrected invoice, an excuse they both knew, since the invoice had been correct for a week, and Willa looked up from the register and said, Fine, I'll go to your dinner. You can come to Melissa's thing. Then, before he could make it into something bigger than it was, it's not a date. I want that understood. It's 2 people not wanting to walk into a room by themselves. Understood, Owen said, and didn't smile too wide about it, which was the right amount of not smiling. He offered, a few days later, to have someone from a shop in Portland send over a few dresses for her to look at. He said it the way people say things they haven't thought through, already reaching for his phone. No, Willa said, fast enough that he stopped mid-reach. It's not a big deal. It's a big deal to me. She folded her arms. I've got a navy dress from the consignment place on 4th Street. I've worn it twice. It still fits. That's what I'm wearing. Owen nodded, but she could tell by the way his jaw worked that he wanted to argue the point, so she gave him something else to chew on instead. Is your mother's house cold? Rich houses are always cold, like they're air-conditioned for penguins. That got the almost smile out of him. It runs cold, yeah. My mother likes it that way. Says warm rooms make people lazy. Bring a sweater then. I'm not freezing for anybody's dinner party. The tailoring came up again a few days after that, smaller this time. He mentioned in passing that he could easily cover having the dress hemmed properly, that it was nothing, really, barely worth mentioning. Nothing to you, Willa said, not unkindly, but flat. When you say a couple $100 is nothing, you know what I hear? I hear that my math doesn't matter. That's not a knock on you. It's not nothing to me. I hem my own dresses. Owen went quiet for a second, turning that over. I didn't think about it that way. Most people who say it don't. I'm sorry. He said it plainly, without asking her to tell him it was fine, and that more than the apology itself was what stuck with her. She proved the point that Saturday, sitting on her own front porch step with a needle and thread, taking up the hem on the navy dress herself while Owen waited a few feet away, oddly out of his depth. He'd brought a bag of oranges from the farm stand, which nobody had asked for, and he peeled one slowly while she worked, offering pieces without comment. "You're better with a boat hull than a sewing needle," she said, glancing at him. "I've never once tried to sew anything." I could tell. In between stitches, she took a call from the oil company about a payment plan for the house, kept her voice even and businesslike through the whole thing, negotiated the due date down a week, and hung up like she'd just discussed the weather. Owen didn't ask about it. She noticed that he didn't ask, and noticed herself noticing. His workshop, when she stopped by the following week to pick up the gray cardigan from the woman near the marina, smelled like cedar and linseed oil. Owen had not paid for a new dress. He had simply carried a sweater with a missing button to somebody who knew how to make old things last. He was sanding the hull of an old sailboat, the same 6 inches of wood over and over, patient in a way that didn't match the man who'd shown up, flustered with a jar of sea glass. "You do that a lot," she said. "The same spot. Wood tells you when it's ready. You rush it, it splits later, somewhere you can't see." He didn't look up. "Takes as long as it takes." "That sounds like patience wearing a man's clothes." "It's the only kind I've got." His phone buzzed on the workbench. He glanced at the screen, Caroline, and let it ring out, 4 times, 5, before turning it face down without a word. Willa watched him do it and didn't ask who Caroline was, not yet. Some things you let a person hand you when they're ready, not when you're curious. They fell, without deciding to, into a habit of saying things to each other that they might not say out loud otherwise. Owen admitting the dinner made his stomach hurt a little, Willa admitting she hadn't told Melissa yet that she was bringing anyone. Somewhere in the 3rd week, sitting on his workshop steps with the sea glass in her pocket and sawdust on the hem of her jeans, she said, half joking, "We should have a rule. Say the true thing, no polishing it up first." "Say the true thing," Owen repeated like he was trying it on. "I can work with that." It became a kind of shorthand between them. A thing one of them said when the other started smoothing an answer too carefully. A small checkpoint neither of them made a big production of. That night, Willa sat on the edge of her bed and took both pieces of sea glass out of the drawer, turning them over in her palm, the old one from Wilgus Beach and the newer one from Owen's jar. She didn't know yet what either dinner would cost her. But she knew, holding them, that whatever happened in those rooms would only mean something if she managed not to leave herself standing outside the door. The Whitaker house sat above the harbor like it had grown there, big without trying to prove it, windows lit gold against the early dark. Willa stood at the base of the steps a moment too long, smoothing the navy dress with both hands. "You can still back out," Owen said, not unkindly. "I hemmed this dress myself. I'm wearing it into that house." She started up the steps before he could offer his arm. Inside, the room smelled like wood smoke and something roasting, and the noise of a dinner already half assembled. Voices, ice in glasses, a string quartet playing low from someone's phone. A woman at the coat closet asked what Willa did, in the particular tone that meant the answer would determine how long she kept listening. Willa said she worked nights at a laundromat and watched the woman's smile hold perfectly still for a second too long before moving on. Owen's mother found them near the dining room. Vivian Whitaker was warm in the way that took practice, her hand light on Willa's arm, her eyes doing a fast, thorough inventory. "Owen didn't tell us much about you," she said, which Willa understood immediately as a complaint dressed as a compliment. "I didn't have much to tell yet," Owen said before Willa had to answer for herself. His brother Andrew arrived shortly after, tall like Owen, but sharper somehow, already checking his watch though the meal hadn't started. He shook Willa's hand with exactly the pressure of a man greeting someone he intended to forget. "Andrew runs the hotel," Owen said. "I just fix what floats." "Someone has to," Andrew said, and it wasn't quite a joke. Caroline arrived last, and the room shifted around her the way rooms do for people used to being noticed. She was lovely and easy and clearly fond of Owen in a way that had nothing hesitant in it. She kissed his cheek like it cost her nothing, said it had been too long, and Willa watched Owen's jaw go tight and still. At the table, Vivian arranged the seating with the casual authority of someone who'd done it for decades, and somehow Caroline ended up beside Owen. "For old time's sake," Vivian said lightly, already moving on to the next name card. Owen's hand closed around his water glass. Willa, 2 seats down, caught his eye and said only, quiet enough that it passed for nothing, "Say the true thing." He exhaled once, and and when the next lull came, he simply asked Andrew to trade seats with him. No scene, no explanation, just done. Later, in the narrow hallway near the kitchen where Willa had gone looking for water, Owen found her and, without much preamble, told her the rest. Caroline had ended things 2 weeks before their wedding. She'd come back around the year his father died, when the estate settled and his share of the trust became, as Owen put it, worth someone's attention again. He said it evenly, like a fact he'd made peace with a long time ago, but Willa heard the old humiliation sitting just under the words. "That's a hell of a thing to make peace with," she said. "You get good at it, or you get quiet about it. Same result from the outside." Back at the table, a guest mistook Willa for one of the catering staff, asking her to clear a dropped fork before she could correct him. She picked it up, handed it back, and said plainly that she wasn't on staff. She was there with Owen. No apology in it. The guest reddened and moved on. Owen, catching the exchange from across the room, said her name properly to the next 3 people who asked, mentioned her father by name, mentioned the laundromat without flinching, like there was nothing about her life that needed smoothing over. It was Andrew who found Owen alone by the window afterward, Willa close enough to catch the edge of it. "People are already asking questions," Andrew said, low. "The financing round's not closed yet. You bringing home someone from a laundromat, it gets talked about. You know how this town is." "She has a name," Owen said. "That's not the point, and you know it." Willa didn't hear the rest. She didn't need to. She understood, standing there in her consignment dress, with her hands folded in front of her, that her presence had already cost Owen something in that house, something with a dollar figure attached to it somewhere, and she had no way yet of knowing whether he'd hold that line when it mattered more than a seating chart. On the drive back, Owen asked if she still wanted him at Melissa's party. "Yes," Willa said, watching the harbor lights slide past the window. But the word came out smaller than she meant it to, because for the first time since the jar of sea glass, she wasn't sure whether they were protecting each other anymore, or just borrowing each other's nerve to survive rooms that were never built for either of them. Melissa and Brian's house always looked like a magazine had exhaled onto it. White trim, a wreath that wasn't for any holiday, framed photos from 3 different vacations arranged along the entry hall, like proof of something. Willa had been coming to this house her whole adult life and had never once stopped noticing the piano in the front room that nobody played. "You okay?" Owen asked at the base of the driveway. "I've survived worse," Willa said, which wasn't exactly an answer, and reached into her coat pocket for the sea glass out of habit before she caught herself doing it and let her hand fall. Melissa opened the door already mid-laugh at something someone else had said, and her face did a small, quick recalibration when she saw Owen standing behind Willa. "Well," she said, "you didn't mention you were bringing anyone." Her eyes moved over him fast, cataloging the coat, the watch, whatever conclusions people reached about a man like that in under 3 seconds. "This is Owen," Willa said. "Owen, my sister Melissa, her husband, Brian." Brian shook Owen's hand with too much enthusiasm, the kind that came from not knowing what else to do with it, and asked about the harbor, boats, anything. Melissa's smile stayed fixed and appraising a beat longer than it needed to. George arrived not long after, moving slow and careful because of his knee, in the good jacket he wore maybe twice a year. Willa watched Melissa cross the room to fuss over a centerpiece that had shifted an inch, and not cross the room to ask their father how the drive had been. It was such a small thing. It was also not a new thing. "You want to sit, Dad?" Willa asked, and got him settled near the window before anyone offered. For a while it was almost fine. Owen was quiet, polite, unremarkable in the way she suspected he'd worked hard to be tonight, on purpose, for her. Someone put on music. A neighbor cornered George about his knee, and George, to his credit, made a joke about it instead of complaining. Then one of Melissa's friends, a woman Willa vaguely recognized from the Harbor Association, said Owen's last name out loud with a little too much interest. "Whitaker, like the hotel?" There was something in the paper about a financing round. Melissa's head turned. Willa watched her sister do the math in real time. The sawdust jacket from a week ago that Willa had mentioned once in passing, the laundromat, the hotel account, and watched something settle behind Melissa's eyes that wasn't confusion. It was closer to recognition of an opportunity. "Huh," Melissa said, loud enough to carry, light enough to seem harmless. I almost left the guest line blank on your invitation. You usually like to keep things so simple." A few people laughed, the way people laugh at things that aren't quite jokes. Willa felt her thumb move toward her pocket again and stopped it. Melissa wasn't finished. She turned toward Owen with the same bright, terrible smile and said she hoped he understood what he was taking on. Willa worked nights after all, and their father needed a lot of looking after, and it wasn't exactly the life a man like him was used to. "I just don't want anyone getting in over their head," she said, to the room more than to either of them. "On either side." The room went quiet in that particular way rooms do, when everyone senses something happening and nobody wants to be the one who names it. She shouldn't need a rich man's pity to feel important at her own family's party, Melissa added, and there it was, out loud, in front of Brian's boss and the Harbor Association woman and their father, sitting by the window with his hands folded in his lap. Owen didn't raise his voice. He didn't move any closer to Willa, didn't put a hand on her shoulder, didn't perform anything. "I'm not here out of pity," he said evenly to Melissa, but loud enough for the room. "If anyone here needs reminding what Willa's worth, that says a lot more about them than it does about her." Then he stepped back, just slightly, and let the room's attention return to where it belonged. Willa looked at her sister. She thought about years of this, the flowers fussed over, the father overlooked, the quiet contest Melissa had been running since they were girls that Willa had never agreed to enter. "Working nights isn't a failure," Willa said, calm, not loud. "Taking care of Dad isn't a failure. Watching every dollar isn't a failure." She glanced once around the room, at the framed vacation photos, at the piano no one played. "The failure is making someone feel small at a party that's supposed to be about love. I didn't come here needing your permission to matter, Melissa. I came because I wanted to." Nobody clapped. Nobody should have. Brian looked at his shoes. The Harbor Association woman found something urgent in her wine glass. Willa crossed to George, helped him up from his chair with a hand under his elbow, and said it was time to go. She didn't look at Owen to see whether he'd follow. For the first time since the jar of sea glass had landed on her counter, she didn't need to know the answer before she walked out the door. Willa drove George home herself, both hands steady on the wheel, the radio off. He didn't say much until they were nearly at the house, and then only, "You didn't have to defend me in there." "I wasn't just defending you." "I know." He looked out the window at the dark shapes of the harbor going by. "Still." Inside, she got him settled at the kitchen table while she laid out his evening pills, the same small ritual they'd done 1,000 times. George watched her hands move down the row of bottles. "I'm proud of you," he said. "What you said back there." "Thanks, Dad. Doesn't fix 30 years of your sister acting like you're a project she's managing, though." He said it plainly, no bitterness in it, just fact. That kind of thing doesn't go away because you finally said it out loud once. "I know that too." They sat a while without talking, George working through a glass of water slower than he needed to, Willa going through the mail without really reading it. Neither of them brought up the oil bill sitting near the bottom of the stack, the one marked in red. Both of them saw it. Willa slid it under a coupon flyer instead of opening it, too tired for one more thing that night. She didn't answer when Owen called. She let it go to voicemail, listened to it twice before bed, an apology, careful and sincere, for not warning her he might say something at the party, for letting the moment become as big as it became. It was a good apology, as apologies went. It still didn't quite reach the thing underneath, which wasn't really about what he'd said in front of Melissa's friends. It was about how her whole private life had ended up on display in a stranger's living room at all. 3 days later, the letter from the heating oil company arrived. Willa opened it standing at the counter, expecting a past due notice, and found instead an account marked paid in full through the end of the season. A receipt had been folded inside, clipped to the invoice number but not to her name. Her stomach dropped before her mind caught up to why. She called the number on the letter. The woman on the phone was cheerful and professionally unhelpful, the way customer service representatives can be when the screen in front of them says less than the person calling needs to know. "It looks like the balance was handled directly, ma'am. I don't have the details on who, just that it's settled." Willa knew who. She drove to the workshop with the letter still in her hand, the paper creased where she'd been gripping it too hard. Owen was at the far bench, sanding a hull that didn't need any more sanding, and he looked up at her face and set the block down slowly, like he already knew. "You paid my father's oil bill." It wasn't a question. "I didn't want you carrying that on top of everything else." He said it steady, like a plan that had made complete sense 2 days ago. "I knew the owner from a marina job," he said. "I gave him the invoice number. He let me pay it without asking too many questions." One phone call. Willa's voice didn't rise, but it went sharp at the edges. "Owen, the woman on the phone thought I was behind on payments I didn't even know were late. You went into my family's finances without asking me." "I was trying to help. I know you were." That was almost the worst part. "But you didn't ask. You just decided on your own that this was a weight I needed lifted, and you lifted it, and now I'm standing in your workshop finding out about my own bills secondhand." She folded the letter once, hard. "I've spent years making sure nobody could say I couldn't manage my own family. You undid that with one phone call, and you didn't even think to check with me first. I can undo it. Let me set it up so you pay me back whatever schedule you want." "That's not the point." She said it slower this time, like she needed him to actually hear it. "The money isn't the problem. You not trusting me enough to ask, that's the problem." Owen was quiet for a long moment, and something in his face shifted, the realization landing slow and heavy. "I didn't think of it that way." "I know you didn't. That's exactly what worries me." Willa looked around the workshop, the careful, patient work everywhere, wood he'd spend weeks getting right, the same 6 inches sanded over and over until it was ready. He clearly knew how to be patient with a hull. He hadn't been patient with her. "I need some distance," she said. "Not forever, just enough to know I'm not somebody's project." Owen didn't argue the point, though it cost him visibly to let it stand. "Okay," he said. "Whatever you need." She left the workshop without the sea glass in her hand this time. She'd left it in the truck, and drove home in silence. That night she put both pieces, the old one and the new one, into the kitchen drawer beside the bills she was determined to open and handle herself, one at a time, in her own name. Owen sat alone in the workshop long after she'd gone, the block of sandpaper still in his hand, running it over wood that had been smooth for an hour already. He understood, finally and without anyone telling him, that the real repair wasn't going to be a phone call or a check or anything dramatic at all. It was going to be doing nothing for a while, and letting that be enough. Summer thinned out slowly along the harbor, the way it always did. Fewer boats on moorings, fog holding longer into the mornings, the tourist crowd at Dot's counter giving way to regulars again. Willa noticed the season changing mostly through her father's jacket, which came off its hook by the door more often now that the mornings had teeth in them. Owen didn't call. He didn't send anything else, no jars, no gestures, nothing arriving unannounced at the laundromat counter. The one time their paths crossed at the hardware store on Main, he nodded from across the aisle and let her be the one to decide whether to say hello. She didn't that day. He didn't seem to hold it against her. What he did instead, she heard about secondhand, the way small towns pass things along. He'd started teaching a free woodworking class 2 evenings a week at the community center, something he'd apparently never done before in his life. Denise mentioned it first, eyebrows up, like she expected Willa to have an opinion ready. "Since when does Owen Whitaker teach a class?" "I have no idea," Willa said, and meant it. She found out more of it from George, who'd started going himself on Tuesdays, mostly for something to do with his hands that his knee couldn't complain about. "Fella doesn't say much," George reported one night over dinner. "Doesn't lecture anybody. Just shows people how to hold a chisel so they don't take a finger off." He said it approvingly, the way he approved of anyone who did a job right without making noise about it. At his mother's house, Owen took a fair amount of grief for it. Vivian called it a phase, said he ought to be helping Andrew with the financing round instead of teaching strangers to build birdhouses. Andrew was more direct, told him over the phone that he was wasting himself. Owen didn't argue either point. He just kept showing up on Tuesdays. Willa, for her part, had signed up for something of her own that same fall, an evening program at the community center that trained people for housing support work, helping families navigate leases and assistance forms. She sat in the back row the first night, feeling every one of her years next to the 20-somethings around her, certain she'd made a mistake. It got better. 3 weeks in, she found herself leaning over a classmate's shoulder, walking a younger woman through a tenant assistance form, line by line, the numbers making sense to her in a way they hadn't when she was the one filling them out for herself. The instructor caught her doing it and told her flatly that she had a knack for this. Willa didn't know what to do with that kind of compliment, so she just said thanks and went back to her own worksheet. Melissa texted twice that fall. The first was an apology, 3 sentences long, that read like something drafted more for Melissa's own conscience than for Willa's benefit. Willa read it once and didn't answer. The second time, weeks later, Melissa mentioned, almost in passing, no announcement attached, that she'd taken George to his cardiology appointment that week because Willa had a shift she couldn't move. She didn't post about it anywhere. She didn't bring it up again. It was such a small thing that Willa almost missed it, and then couldn't stop noticing that it was the first time in years Melissa had done something for their father without needing anyone to see her doing it. One night, hunting through the kitchen drawer for a utility bill she'd set aside to open herself, Willa found the 2 pieces of sea glass sitting where she'd left them weeks before. She turned them over in her palm under the kitchen light. She'd put them away angry, she remembered. Or not angry exactly, just tired of being managed. Holding them now, she felt something steadier. She could take a kindness from somebody and still tell them no. Those 2 things weren't opposites, whatever she'd believed in the moment she'd shoved the drawer shut. She saw Owen once more before the season turned, through the community center's side doorway, laughing with one of his students over a board he'd apparently measured wrong twice in a row. He looked easy in a way she hadn't seen at his mother's table or in his own workshop with an apology in his mouth. She stood there a second, half in the doorway herself, and then went on to her own classroom instead of crossing over. It wasn't coldness. It was just, not yet. The flyer came home with George the following week, tacked loosely to his jacket pocket where he'd forgotten about it. A harbor fundraiser, a boathouse near the water, tables for local programs. Willa's class was listed as a presenter, 2 lines down, under community partners, so was Owen's woodworking class. She stood in the kitchen holding the flyer a long moment, George asking from the next room whether she wanted tea, and she didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't know the answer, because she was still deciding what kind of room she wanted to walk into this time and who she wanted to be when she got there. The boathouse smelled like brine and old rope, folding chairs set up in uneven rows, tables lined along one wall with hand-lettered signs instead of anything printed. Willa arrived early with a box of intake packets under one arm, alone because George had insisted he could come later without being managed like a porch plant. She had argued for 3 minutes in the kitchen, lost on the 4th, and left him with his good jacket laid over the back of a chair. She hadn't planned on being nervous. She'd done the reading twice at home, said it out loud to the kitchen while George pretended not to listen from his chair. But standing at her table with a small crowd gathering, social workers, a few contractors, a couple from 2 streets over who'd nearly lost their rental last winter, her voice shook on the first sentence anyway. My name's Willa Sawyer. I work nights at Harbor Lights, and this year I started training to help families navigate leases and assistance paperwork, because I got tired of watching people get treated like a problem instead of a person going through something hot. She didn't smooth the shake out of her voice. She just kept going. Nobody in this room needs charity. What people need is somebody who won't make them feel small for needing help. George arrived 10 minutes after the talk ended, with Melissa beside him and his spare jacket folded over her arm. His knee had acted up halfway across the parking lot, and Melissa had apparently made the executive decision to ignore every protest he gave her. I was not rescued, George told Willa before she could say anything. Melissa looked tired, a little windblown, and careful with her face. He was escorted, she said. George snorted. I was handled. You were limping. I was limping independently. Willa introduced him to 2 of her classmates afterward, watched him shake their hands and ask real questions instead of making small talk, and felt something settle in her chest that had nothing to do with Owen at all. He was there, she knew, off near the far wall by a table with a hand-painted sign that read, Whitaker Woodshop, Community Class. He didn't come to the front. 2 of his students did the talking, a retired school teacher and a kid who couldn't have been older than 19, both of them describing what the Tuesday class had meant to them with more enthusiasm than Owen would have mustered for himself. He stood back with his hands in his pockets, letting it be theirs. They found each other eventually, near a table stacked with name tags nobody had bothered to organize. Owen's tag was crooked, stuck on sideways just above his collar. "You've restored a 40-year-old sailboat hull," Willa said, "and you can't beat a piece of adhesive paper. Some fights you just lose." He straightened it, made it worse, gave up. They stood there a moment in the noise of the room, and then Owen said what he'd apparently been working up to since she walked in. "I've thought about what I did. With the oil bill." He didn't dress it up. "I took a decision away from you because watching you carry that weight made me uncomfortable, and it was easier to make one phone call than sit there not being able to fix it. That's the truth of it. I'm not asking you to say it's fine. I just wanted you to hear me actually name it." "I hear you," Willa said. The hurt hadn't disappeared. She didn't pretend it had. But something in the way he'd said it, plain, no performance in it, made room for something else to sit beside the hurt instead of crowding it out. Later, Melissa found Willa near the coffee urn, while George was arguing with a retired contractor about the proper way to fix a porch step. She did not make a speech out of it. She only said she had been wrong for a long time, and that she knew an apology text did not undo it. Then she asked what time George's next cardiology appointment was, like it was the most ordinary question in the world, like she intended to be there for it. 3 weeks from Thursday," Willa said. 2 o'clock. I'll take him." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't forgiveness handed over whole either. Willa filed it away as one more small thing to watch, the way she'd watched the last one hold. Later, near the boathouse doors with the crowd thinning, Willa took both pieces of sea glass from her coat pocket and held one out to Owen. "It only goes smooth because the ocean doesn't quit on it just because it hurts," she said. "Took me a while to figure out I'd been mixing up being needed with being loved, and being helped with being managed. They're not the same thing." She closed his hand around the glass. "I'm done getting that confused." Owen turned the piece over once in his palm and didn't try to give it back. Months later, with the harbor bare of pleasure boats and her days split between the laundromat and casework with the family fighting eviction, Owen asked her to dinner. No occasion attached to it, no audience, nothing dressed up as more than it was. "Yes," Willa said. Then, because she'd learned to say the true thing without waiting to be asked twice, "That doesn't mean I'm signing up for your mother's dinners or your brother's opinions or being anybody's project." "I'd expect nothing less," Owen said. She walked into the small restaurant dining room beside him that evening, past a chalkboard menu and a hostess stand with a bowl of peppermint candies, not as proof that a rich man had finally chosen her, but as proof of something steadier, that two people could stand next to each other without either one disappearing to make room for it. And that brings our story to a close. Before we go, a gentle reminder. This story is fictional, created for entertainment and storytelling, but the feeling behind it is real. Love often shows up in the smallest hands, the quietest prayers, and the courage to ask for help. What moment touched your heart the most? Tell us in the comments. If this story moved you, please like, share it with someone who still believes in kindness, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. You can watch another inspiring story on the end screen or in our playlist. Thank you for being here with us. Stay warm, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story.